In MonstaTama, you play as a Tama, going on journeys to tame and shelter the most renowned monstas of the land. Each round, you will select the cards that you will encounter in your path, then tame the monsters that you encounter to add them to your team, and finally, shelter all monsters on your team. The player who has sheltered the most renowned worth of monsters and wisps at the end of the third round is the winner. This video will walk through playing the introductory game, then explain how the standard game differs. Rules specific to the solo variant will be provided in a different video, linked in this video's description. It is still recommended that solo players watch and follow along with this video before watching the solo-specific video. Timestamps will be provided in the video description to enable quick reference of individual sections of the rules. To set up the game, set the turn order board to the side of the play area. Place the wisps in a pile in the center of the play area, along with the 10 wisp cards to form the wisp supply. Each player chooses a color and receives a journey board of that color. Each player also receives a shelter holder and a journey action card. Each player puts a Revelopus in their shelter. Place a turn marker of each player's color in a random order on the turn order track. With the exception of the cards that have already been given to players, all cards in MonstaTama belong to a biome. Each biome includes 44 cards players build paths with, 4 biome info cards that detail special rules cards from the biome use, and 4 artist cards that are only used in the solo variant. You can identify the biome a card is from by looking for the biome symbol or looking for the flares at the sides of the card. Every time you play MonstaTama, you will play with a subset of the biomes, and cards from other biomes will not be used. In the case of the introductory game, you will only be using cards from Paths of the Torrent, Terrafell Crevices, and Biome Ruins. Cards from other biomes can be left in the box. Place the Terrafell Crevices biome info card on the round 2 space of the turn order board, and the Biome Ruins biome info card on the round 3 space. Rounds in MonstaTama typically start with a draft phase, but this phase is skipped in the first round of the introductory game, so it will be detailed later. Instead of performing the draft phase, each player receives 10 cards from the Paths of the Torrent biome that have a sign in their art that matches the player's color. Each player should receive the exact same 10 cards, shown here, just with different colored signs in the art. These cards can be placed in the player's supplies, which are located below the shelter holders. The second phase of the round is the preparation phase. In this phase, all players simultaneously choose 10 cards from their supply that will be in their path this round, as well as a single monster from their shelter that will start on their team. In the first round of the introductory game, you will only have 10 cards in your supply, and 1 monster in your shelter, so there are currently no choices to be made. Players shuffle the 10 cards they select for their path, then spread them face down above their journey board into their path area. It is recommended that players place the 10 cards on the right side of their path area, then spread to the left, so that the top card ends up on the left. Players also move the 1 monster they selected from their shelter to their team area below their journey board, leaving it face up. Players also refill their discard to 15 wisps at this time. At any time, players can interchange 10 wisp cubes in a single location with a 10 wisp card. Despite being a card, it is not considered a card for game effects, and should only be treated as 10 wisps in one location. Players may not view other players' play areas until they have finished preparing their own path and team. After all players have finished preparing their path and team, give players a moment to view the monsters others are starting with on their team. In the first round, typically everyone will be starting with Revelopus, but in future rounds, players may choose to start with other monsters they sheltered in a previous round, which may be noteworthy to other players. After players have viewed other players' play area, proceed to the journey phase. The journey phase is played simultaneously, with all players continuously using actions until they no longer wish to. The 3 actions a player may take are listed on the journey action card. Each action may be activated any number of times, and actions may be activated in any order. Once a player starts activating an action, they must complete all steps of that action before using another action. If a player is not able to do all of what an action or ability instructs to do, they do as much as possible. Like in the preparation phase, it is intended that players do not view other players' play areas until they finish their own journey phase. However, when playing with new players, it is encouraged that players ask each other questions and view each other's play areas if clarification for effects is needed. Here are the important parts of a monster card to know. The top left-hand corner is the monster's level. which dictates how difficult it is to tame, which we will go over shortly. In the top right-hand corner, in the sun, is the monster's renown. The player with the most renown in their shelter at the end of the game wins. All monsters in your team move to the shelter at the end of the round, so taming as much renown worth as monsters as possible is usually the goal of the journey phase. Below the monster's art is its abilities. Abilities provide various effects that you can take advantage of. Different types of abilities will activate at different times, usually corresponding with a specific action that matches the ability's color. The triangles at the bottom of the card indicate how many copies of the card exist in the biome. Monster abilities will sometimes instruct for cards to receive Wisps. Wisps are the cubes that start in the discard each round. Not only do Wisps make it easier to tame monsters, they are worth a renown, so sheltering monsters with Wisps on them is an additional way to increase your renown. Now the video will show an example of playing partway through a journey phase to show examples of using each of the actions. At the top of the journey action card is the encounter action. The encounter action reveals the next card of the path, which is always the leftmost card, and moves it to the vicinity in the center of the journey board. Then, encountered abilities, if any, of the cards that move to the vicinity are activated. Encounter abilities have ENCTR written in the small white box at the top left of the ability box, and the ability box will be pink, matching the color of the encounter action. In this case, Serve has an encounter ability, so it activates now. It instructs to reveal the next 3 face-down cards in the path. When revealing cards, be sure to keep them in their original position, just turn them face up. This gives us information about upcoming cards in our path. Face-up cards stay revealed even as they move between different areas until something specifically tells you to flip them face down. We have completed the encounter action, so we will now use another action. Again, actions can be used any number of times and in any order, so let's use another encounter action. If you're instructed to reveal a card that is face up, simply leave it face up. Skull does not have an encountered ability, so that is the end of the encounter action. Next, we will use the Tame Action. First, the Tame Action moves a single monster that is in your vicinity and has a level that is lower than your sense. Sense is just a fancy word for the number of components in your vicinity. There is a reminder of this written in the bottom right of the vicinity. In this case, the sense is 2, as there are 2 cards in the vicinity. Since the sense here is 2, the level 3 Serve cannot be moved, but the level 2 Skull can. After moving the monster to the team, the Tame Action then discards all cards left in the vicinity. It does not matter if there is more sense than necessary to move the monster, all cards in the vicinity are discarded after a single monster moves to the team. Due to this, players often want to be careful about how many cards they move to their vicinity before using the Tame Action. Lastly, the Tame Action activates tamed abilities on the monster that move to the team. These abilities will have Tamed written in the top left of their ability box, and the box will be blue, matching the color of the Tame Action. Skull's Tamed ability contains the Receives Wisp icon. This icon will always be preceded by a location and followed by a number in the square parentheses. In this case, the ability can be read as a card in your path receives 1 Wisp. The ability does not specify which card in the path receives Wisps, so it is the player's choice. A card can receive Wisps whether it is face up or face down. When a card receives Wisps, it comes from the player's discard. If a player has no Wisps in their discard, they can no longer place Wisps. This limits the amount of Wisps a player can place on their cards each round to 15. That's the end of the Tame Action. Let's use another encounter action to move Pupillum to the vicinity. Wisps move with cards they are on until the cards are discarded or sheltered. They remain on the cards even as the cards are flipped face up or face down. It is important to note that Wisps count as components in the vicinity. This means that the sense here is 2, 1 card plus 1 Wisp. Since Pupillum's level is 2, the Tame Action can be used right now to move it to the team. Notably, the Wisp moves with Pupillum as it moves to the team, leaving the vicinity empty, meaning that no cards end up being discarded by the second part of the Tame Action. Pupillum has no tamed abilities, so that is the end of the Tame Action. Pupillum has a Fin ability, which will activate later in the round if it is on your team. But let's read its effect now so we can prepare for it. Like Skull, it has a Receive Wisp icon. The location that precedes the icon is I. In MonstaTama, cards will refer to themselves using first-person pronouns such as I or me. So in this case, the location that is receiving wisps is pupillum itself. Also, the number in square parentheses that follows the icon is not just a simple number. It is a number that can change based on certain factors. In this case, is looking for the number of monsters on your team that have 5 or more total renown. Remember that wisps count as renown. Right now, we have a monster with 0 renown, 2 renown, and 4 renown. So if Pupillum's ability was to activate now, it would receive 0 wisps, as there are 0 monsters with 5 or more total renown on the team. But remember, Fin abilities activate in the next phase of the game, so there's still the rest of the journey phase to add 5 renown monsters to the team. Text that appears in rounded parentheses is reminder text. It is included as a helpful reminder for how an ability typically functions, but its inclusion or absence does not change how a card functions. The action detailed at the bottom of the Journey Action card is the Monsta Action. This action simply activates an act ability of a monster in your team, such as Revelopus's ability, which once again is green, matching the color of the Monsta Action. If we activate Revelopus's ability, it instructs to move a card in your discard to your vicinity. Note that this card is being moved to the vicinity without using the encounter action, so encountered abilities do not activate. Then, Revelopus instructs to shelter itself. In this way, Revelopus's ability can only be used once per round, as it removes itself from the team when it uses its ability. If a monster does not remove itself from the team with its act ability, the ability could be continued to be used by using the Monsta Action again. Players continue taking actions as often as they wish until there are no more actions they wish to take, at which point you flip your Journey Action card face down to indicate this. This typically will be when you have no more cards in your path or vicinity, but you may choose to end your Journey Actions with cards still in your path or vicinity if you wish. Once you have flipped your action card face down, you may not take any more actions this round, but you may now look at what other players are doing. Once all players have flipped their Journey Action card face down, play proceeds to the finale phase. A quick recap about important concepts for the Journey phase. You may use each action any number of times and in any order. Players often use the encounter action 2 to 3 times before using the Tame Action, as well as using Monsta Action at opportune moments in between. A monster's level must be lower than your sense to move it with the Tame Action, and sense is equal to the number of cards plus wisps in the vicinity. Wisps always move with the cards they are on, and only move back to the discard when specifically instructed to, or when a card they are on is discarded. There is no limit to the number of cards that can be in your vicinity. However, remember that after moving a monster to your team using the Tame Action, taking all Wisp it has with it, everything that is left in your vicinity is discarded, even if they weren't all needed to tame the monster. A legend of different terms that you will encounter in the journey phase is provided on the back of the rulebook. If you are following along with the video as you learn to play for the first time, this is a good opportunity to pause the video and allow everyone to play through their journey phase, then come back to the video to learn about the finale and draft phase. In the finale phase, players activate all Fin abilities on their team in turn order, then count the renown on their team to set turn order for the next round, and shelter the monsters on their team. In the turn order indicated on the turn order board, each player takes a turn activating Fin abilities. When it is a player's turn, they may activate the Fin abilities on their team in any order, but must activate all Fin abilities on their team before the next player takes their turn. Players may look at other players' play areas during the finale phase. Once all players have had a turn to activate their Fin abilities, all players calculate and announce the total renown that is on their team. This is the sum of each monster's printed renown, plus 1 for every Wisp on the team. Once players have announced their totals, reorder markers on the turn order track with the player with the least renown first and the player with the most last. If there is a tie, the tied players stay in their previous order. Finally, all players shelter all monsters in their team. Any Wisps on these monsters move to the shelter as well, but are no longer associated with the monster, and just sit in the Wisp trough. Any cards at this point that the player have not sheltered, such as cards in discard, vicinity, or path, are moved to the player's supply, so that they can be included in the path again during future rounds. Wisps on any cards in the vicinity or path are moved back to the discard. If it is the first or second round of the game, the next round of the game begins. If it is the third round of the game is now over, and all players count the total renown in their shelter. The player with the most renown in their shelter wins. If you are wanting to learn the solo variant, now is a good time to watch its specific video linked in this video's description. The video will now go over the draft phase that typically starts each round, but was skipped on the first round of the introductory game. First, give each player a copy of the Biome info card that is sitting on the current round space. These cards detail any special rules associated with the cards players may receive this round. Shuffle the cards from that biome to form the draft deck and give each player 5 cards. These cards go to the player's supplies. Cards and player supplies usually are stored beneath the shelter holder, but for the draft and preparation phases, players can lay their supply in front of them so they can easily view the cards they have access to. Form the draft area by placing 2 journey boards face down above the turn order board. Discard cards from the draft deck to the side until the number needed for the player count remains in the draft deck. 18 cards if you are playing with 2 to 3 players, or 24 cards with 4 players. Place the remaining draft deck above the draft area, and deal a card to each space on the draft area used for the current player count. 3 spaces on each board for 2 to 3 players, and all 4 spaces for 4 players. The following will be repeated 6 times, at which point the draft deck will be depleted, and there will be no more cards to draft. In turn order, each player with a marker on the turn order track will place their marker on a card in the draft area they wish to acquire, and does not already have a marker on it. Then, all cards that have a marker on the bottom row are moved to the supply of the player who has their marker on it, and the marker will move to the turn order space directly below. All cards remaining in the bottom row that did not have a marker on them are discarded. Move the top row of cards, along with any markers on them, to the bottom row. Refill the now empty top row with cards from the draft deck. Notice that when you place on the top row, you will not return to the turn order track for the next round of drafting. This means that every time you place on the top row, you will end up receiving 1 less card, but sometimes reserving a card on the top row will be important enough to do so. After the 6th row of cards have been drafted, the resulting turn order is the turn order that the round's finale phase will be played in. Play then proceeds to the preparation phase. Remember, unlike the preparation phase in the first round of the introductory game, all players should have more than 10 cards in their supply after the draft, so players now must choose which 10 cards they want to include in their path. After the first round, players will also have more choice as to which monster from their shelter starts on their team. That should be everything you need to know to play your first game of MonstaTama. If any questions come up during play, check the FAQ section at the back of the rulebook, or ask them on the MonstaTama Discord server that is linked in the video's description. After players have played the introductory game, it is recommended that players play the standard game on future plays. The video will now go over the differences you need to know to play the standard game. During setup, instead of placing the Terrafell Crevices and Chaos Ruins biome info cards on the turn order board, shuffle 1 of each biome info card together, then deal a random 2 to the round 1 space on the turn order board, and 1 each to the round 2 and 3 spaces. This way, each time you play the standard game, you will play with a different combination of biomes appearing in a different order. Instead of dealing players 10 cards from the Paths of the Torrent biome during setup, in the standard game, the draft phase is played in the first round. The first round of the standard game contains 2 biomes, so cards from both of those biomes will be shuffled together to form the draft deck. Players receive 10 cards into their supply instead of 5 before the draft in the first round. Then the remainder of the draft, preparation, journey, finale phases, and subsequent rounds are played identical to the introductory game, just with likely different biomes being introduced each round.